Okay, so we are live now. So Liz, I don't know if you want to start from your side.
Yeah. We can start off. Okay, awesome. Yeah. Well, welcome to today's discussion. We're talking about a topic that's very sensitive, but one that easily is ignored by a lot of people because at times it feels like it's a public sector or the government's issue. So not a lot of citizens kind of bother about public debt and how your country is actually borrowing money. So for today, we're going to have an amazing discussion. We're talking about money, one of my favorite topics, but we're looking at it from money that we owe. So the debt that a lot of countries, especially in the global south, have. And the theme for today's discussion is future of public debt in Africa. What must be done now? Now, the reason we're talking about this being a now problem is because we know we need to service and we need to replenish the debts that we have. That means we need to return the money, but there's a lot of interest to what we're borrowing. And Africa is facing a debt paradox. Now, recent estimates indicate that fairly more than 20 African countries are either experiencing debt distress or at a high risk of failing into it. So, in some cases, governments are spending more on debt repayments than on health, education, or social protection programs. And these are things that really matter the most to African citizens. Now, this challenge is being compounded by the declining of official development assistance. Do not worry, I'm throwing in a lot of words, but we do have experts who are going to break it down so that we are all on the same page and understand why we're talking about the debt cases now and why this is a crucial discussion. So, tighter global lending conditions, higher borrowing costs, currency fluctuations, there are some terms that you will resonate with because we do know and we feel it in our countries, and repeated economic shocks, all of which are placing additional pressure on countries to borrow. There's always something that's pushing us towards borrowing more, despite having debts that we cannot replenish. So the debate is no longer whether African countries should borrow. The question is how much debt is too much debt. And that's why we're having this particular discussion. That's why we have experts from the legal side, from civil societies, youth representatives, and also experts from the global north, just trying to help us understand why this is an issue we need to tackle now. And how the question is, you're a youth, you're a Gen Z, if you're coming from Kenya, why does this actually affect you? So you will come to understand as we continue with this discussion on why that situation in Africa is something that concerns every one of us. So now what? We need to have a genuine conversation and we need to involve all stakeholders, but we also need to understand what it means for you as an individual when your country borrows and over borrows or continues to borrow. Now, that was just a snippet of what we're going to talk about. Of course, I'm not an expert. I only love money when it's time for me to spend it. But when it comes to the government actually borrowing and how that affects my finances or my lifestyle or the way I live, it's more of a task. I still don't understand it. But that's the reason why we're having this discussion so that we can actually come to understand when your government borrows, how does it affect you directly or indirectly? So, welcome. I'm super excited. We have amazing panelists who are experts when it comes to financing, health, youth, advocacy, you name it. We'll start off by bringing in somebody who will give us a global landscape on where we're at. So we're calling it the debt reality check. And I'm going to call upon our keynote all the way from the United States of Africa. I'm not going to introduce Dr. Kate because her bio is quite amazing and it's pretty broad. I tried to narrow it down, Doc, to a paragraph. I didn't do it much justice. So I'll let you introduce yourself and let us know the debt reality. What and where are we with that? Over to you, Dr. Tilenko.
Great. Thank you so much, Lizzie. And it's a pleasure to be here today with all of you. I'm Dr. Kate Tilenko, the founder and CEO of Corvus Health, which is a social enterprise with the mission of giving all people access to health workers. And previously, I served as the director of USAID's Global Health Workforce Program, where I did a turnaround of the project. I turned negative reviews into positive reviews. And also, I did the first economic analysis of the program, showing that it had saved both low and middle income country governments and the US governments literally tens of millions of dollars through improved management of health workforce and improved access to healthcare. And before that, I served as the coordinator of the World Bank's Africa Health Workforce Program, where I was involved in a lot of government issues and governance, and also looking at public debt and whether or not countries should borrow, what they should borrow in, and also looking at issues of forgiveness, debt forgiveness. I also served on President Biden's President's Advisory Council on doing business in Africa. And so now we're going to talk about, what public debt is, why it's important to you. And can you see the presentation? It should say Debt Reality Check. Lizzie, are you able to see that? I've loaded it into the system.
I don't think so. Are you able to, maybe?
I'm trying to bring it to the stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see how. Yeah, I haven't used this platform before. Hold on.
There it is. Yes, I can see it now.
Okay, you can see it. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about Debt Reality Check. And did it just advance? Were you able to see that? No. Okay, hold on.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about some of the numbers. Why is this important? So sub-Saharan African countries combined own about $1 trillion. And this amount has doubled since the 2022 level. The reason for this is COVID, because high-income countries weren't able to mobilize money fast enough during the crisis. So African countries borrowed in order to meet the needs of their people. And we know that 25 out of 48 African countries are in debt distress or at high risk of this. We'll talk a little bit later about what that means, and we'll introduce a glossary that can help you learn, what some of the vocabulary is around some of these issues. And then these numbers, $70, $63, and $44, this is the amount of money per capita that African countries are spending on average on debt service. That's just interest on versus the public spending on healthcare, versus public spending on education, versus public spending on health. And when you actually look at the how much African countries are spending on both interest and principal, it's more than both spending on public health and education combined. So basically, you're spending more to service your debt than you are investing in your youth and investing in your future. Okay, and here's a quote from the World Bank that it's not just a debt crisis, it's a development shutdown. That basically, if the debt service doesn't work properly, it could make it very difficult for African countries to move forward in their development. But trajectory is not destiny. We have a number of policy levers to address these issues, and they're listed here. The first is see the debt. We have to make public debt visible. Youth and other people have to engage in the debt. They have to tell their government what they think of the debt. We need a radical transparency in governance. We need websites where you can see what the debt is, where it explains what the debt is for, why you're taking on new debt. There need to be logical frameworks. This is what draws the sort of the logical line between what's borrowed and what we expect to happen. For example, are you borrowing $100 million to, build new schools? Or are you borrowing $100 million to give small loans to youth entrepreneurs? And, what percent of those entrepreneurs you expect to be successful? How much money they'll make, and does that result in a benefit more than the amount of money that you're borrowing? That type of information needs to be made public so that everybody can see it. We also need, less debt. We need to borrow less debt. And one way to do that is make the implementation of projects much more cost effective and sustainable. For example, it doesn't make sense anymore to give subsidies in fuel and electricity because this just incentivizes people to be wasteful, not to conserve electricity and energy. And it's not clear, what will be the benefit of people using all this extra electricity. So that type of efficiency has to be found. In addition, we have to, restructure a way a lot of things are done. Unfortunately, especially in the development space, a lot of operations are framed after teams and operations in high-income countries, and they're just not cost-effective, and they need to be changed. And also, we need to shrink the debt that remains, mainly through debt swaps. Often what these are is they're long-standing policy issues that banks and high-income countries have wanted low-income countries to make, but those countries haven't made them yet. A prime example of this is civil service reform. For example, in many civil services in sub-Saharan Africa, it's very difficult to fire people who are not performing, people who don't show up. Often there are estimates that 30% or more of civil service are ghost workers, fake workers. Retirement ages are still in the 50s, even though life expectancies have expanded greatly, especially for civil servants and other high-income people. And so if the governments make these reforms, making it so civil service employees have limited term contracts, and so if they're not performing, their contracts aren't renewed, or making public universities semi-autonomous, or requiring people to work into their 60s in order to get a pension, that those will drive efficiencies and make it much easier to pay the debt back, and by having the swap, that debt gets forgiven. Okay, and let's see. There. And in order to help you better understand public debt, we've created this glossary for you. It'll be available for you through See the Light Foundation to just help you understand. There are about 20 or 30 words that you need to understand in order to discuss debt. And we often find that young people can be intimidated by the terminology. It's difficult to argue your point if someone's sort of speaking a different language from you. And so that's why we've created this. And we urge you to read it, to understand it, and to engage with your local leaders as well as your elected officials to reduce public debt and make sure that it's spent more cost effectively. Okay. And then, we need to reduce borrowing. And once again, this is about efficiency. Digitalize procurement and payroll, eliminate ghost workers, consolidate overlapping agencies. We have to drive a radical efficiency, that smarter subsidies that I was talking about, reducing fuel and electricity subsidies. We also need to introduce sin taxes. These are taxes on sins such as alcohol, tobacco, gambling, highly processed foods, sugary soft drinks. And the reason why you get a double payment from these taxes is not only do you gather taxes that can be spent on the public good, but by discouraging these bad behaviors, discouraging obesity, discouraging the liver disease and cancer that alcohol causes, you have better health for your populace, and you have fewer health expenses in the future. So there really is a double benefit from these types of sin taxes. And once again, this is important because we know that many countries spend more on external debt than they do on their social sectors. And then, reducing the legacy debt, we need these debt for policy swaps. As we mentioned, it can be reforms in the civil service, health financing, education, climate, also debt for high-skilled workers. Africa is increasingly the source of high-skilled health workers, IT workers, other types of workers, and it costs $1 million to train a physician in high-income countries, and so every time they recruit a physician from Africa, they're saving $1 million, and so we can do this debt for health worker swaps, and let's see. And so it's important to know that, There. Okay. We're going to now go into some case studies, just to, so you can understand what situation countries are in. And I urge you to look into your own country's debt and understand, what's the legacy debt, how much you're paying in interest, how much you're paying in principal, or what type of new debt they're considering, what it's being invested in, how it's going to be spent. Is any of it going to be spent on youth? And so here for Zambia, we see that there's a debt to GDP ratio of 133%, and that really is just unsustainable. They had a pandemic era default. They weren't able to pay during COVID, but they've been very innovative in doing this common framework test. So it's, as you can see, they've been working to try to change it, but it really is a challenge. The next slide, we're looking at Ghana, let's see. They have, they had to take what's called a national haircut, and that they, had to reduce spending by 37%. And there's a 55% debt to GDP ratio. This is much more sustainable than Zambia, but still is quite a burden. And then finally, for the case studies, because I'm running out of time, you have Kenya. And Kenya is a relatively strong economy, but still the debt is dragging down the economy. And you see that they're managing it. They have had some buybacks, with the Euro bonds being bought back. But citizens, as you see, are being more engaged now. I mean, this is really a success story. The 2024 protests really, forces withdrawal of certain tax measures and had revenue reform. So you see, and this was entirely youth-led. So you see the result of youth action here. And I think that's the last slide. But we need to remember that a development shutdown is not a choice. We have an opportunity to do a restart. It's very important that youth be involved in this restart. And so talk to your local leaders, be engaged. And once again, we need to make the debt transparent so that people can see it, engage in it, talk to their leaders about it. We need to be more efficient with the debt that we have. With the new debt that we have, and that we have to shrink any existing debt. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Doc. And as I mentioned, this was from a global lens, and I really do appreciate the fact that I've just seen my country there, and we're doing quite a bit good to be on the safe side. And of course, it's because of the youth movement that came out. There was a time that Kenyan youth actually went on social media and demanded that the World Bank not give out money to the country. So we had enough of it. So I really do appreciate that. But just a quick follow-up question. I know you mentioned something about, and because you're an expert when it comes to the workforce, the healthcare workforce, you did mention that you've helped save tens and tens of millions of dollars when it comes to ghost workers, and that is an issue that we're facing, especially in my country. We've had cases of ghost workers within the public space. How does that actually work? How do you, maybe you can just give it a little bit of a snippet of that, how that works in order for that amount of money to be saved in the long run?
Well, absolutely. And first, I want to say that this type of civil service reform and eliminating ghost workers is extremely achievable. It's doable. My project did it in multiple countries, including the DRC, arguably one of the most difficult operational environments in the world. And so what you do is you get the records of who is in the civil service from the Ministry of Civil Service or Ministry of Public Service. So you have the public payrolls, who they are paying on a regular basis. And then you go down to the facility level and you see who's actually showing up, who's on the roster. Sometimes you go to the level of sort of taking attendance and seeing who's there. And then you compare those two lists. And you'll see that, often they're paying 10 physicians and 50 nurses at a facility, but on a day-to-day basis, there are only 5 physicians and 20 nurses showing up, and you make that connection, and you eliminate the payments of the people either who are not showing up or who are fake people or people who are on the payroll twice. And so it really is sort of an administrative accounting activity. And it is not technically difficult. It is politically challenging. So you need the political will to do that.
I can imagine, because it's a matter of getting a list and going to the ground to see whether these people do exist. It looks like it's a simple 1 and 2 sort of a math, but yes, at the end of it, it all becomes political. Thank you so much, Dr. K. That was quite amazing, and thank you for giving us that clear landscape of what the debt is. Share the glossary. Will also circulate that so that people can now start understanding these technical terms that actually accompany your debt. We'll move on to the next section, and I appreciate the fact that you also brought in the Kenya case study, and we're doing quite well. So I'm going to bring in an advocate from Kenya. I mean, this is good. This is good remarks, Valentine, that has come from Dr. Kate. Um, Looks like the Gen Z movement has done some sort of impact. We're paying our debt one way or another, so we're not defaulters. That's a beautiful thing to hear. But Valentine, I'll just bring you in to let us know the legal standing and some of these terminologies, and the education that a citizen like myself should have while we're talking about public debt, debt servicing, etc. I mean, we've had quite a mouthful from Dr. Kate. We want to break that down so that we understand. It's like, speak to me, but speak to me directly, come to me directly with these words so that I understand what this is all about. So why are we having this discussion, Valentine? Why is it crucial for a citizen to pay attention to public debt in the discussions that we're having?
Thank you, Lizzie, for the question, and also Dr. Kate for setting pace for the presentation and the purpose for which we are here today. So just as a brief introduction, my name is Valentine Gaya. I'm an advocate of the High Court in Kenya, and I also practice corporate and public finance law and every other derivative that comes in between. So just to move ahead to the question, let me begin with a simple truth. Debt is not an enemy. Every government borrows. The question is not whether we borrow, it is what we borrow for, who we borrow from, and who pays the price. So today I want to talk about 5 things every citizen needs to understand about public debt. These are not technical matters for economists alone. They are governance issues that affect every family, every business, and every child in any country now. So the 5 aspects of it will be: what is the basis for borrowing? Number 1. Number 2, the budget process. Number 3, what is a supplementary budget? Number 4, and this is controversial, what is the debt ceiling? And then just to crown it all, I'll want to talk about the citizen rights, which is now the most powerful check on government excess. So number 1, on what is the basis of public finance and borrowing. Governments naturally borrow to finance the gap between what they collect and what they spend. This gap is what we call the fiscal deficit. So you end up noticing that persistent deficits means a growing debt. And I think that is much straightforward, but this is where it gets interesting. African governments are borrowing, but they're also innovating. This is to mean that they are moving away from traditional loans towards an aspect of securitization, which means they are raising funds against future government collections like taxes, levies, minerals, and any other form of revenue you could think about at the moment. So the Treasury on one part is going to tell you that this is not a loan, but World Bank on the other side says this is a debt. So the big question that usually accrues is who is right? For an enlightened citizen, the answer is clear. If you are spending tomorrow's revenue today, it does not matter what you call it. It is a mortgage on our future. So the fundamental question under this that the citizens then need to ask is, are we investing in productive assets that will grow our economy, or are we just consuming what's in the future? Number 2 aspect would be the budget making process. Lizzie, the budget is supposed to be a social contract between the government and its people. That's number one. Number two, it reflects the national priority. But in practice, you'll notice that based on the representative nature of our governments, you vote for one person, then they go represent you. Citizens are usually knocked out of this conversation. And therefore, when government is doing its budget making process, you just end up noticing that budget consultations become a checkbox exercise. Don't really go step to step to say why we want this and why it needs to be taken into consideration. So that you'll notice today, in many of our countries, governments are spending more on net interest payments than on health and education. And we need to let that sink in. More of our tax money flows out of the country to foreign creditors, that it flows into our local hospital for the children, aspects of education, health, and everything else that comes in between. So when citizens do not understand the budget, they cannot challenge this reality. They cannot ask important questions like, for example, why are we paying interest instead of building a classroom? So that the landscape of what an enlightenment would be is for the average citizen to be able to look past the headlines. It means to demand the full budget line by line and asking the uncomfortable questions. Then now will give you context on why this budget process is. So aspect number 3 is a build up to the budget process, and this is the aspect of the supplementary budget. How it works is, if the main budget is the law, my understanding of this aspect is that if the main budget is the law, because it eventually ends up becoming a law, then the supplementary budget aspect is where the loophole suffices. So what you'll notice is that supplementary budgets were designed for emergency. In a proper democracy, supplementary budget is designed for emergencies. These emergencies include unforeseen events, but in practice, they have become routine. So that what you notice is government will proceed to spend first, then come and seek parliamentary approval. And this is where the crisis begins. When arrears are overdue, the accumulating arrears is usually the first visible sign of debt distress. This is the situation where you see a country is struggling or failing to meet its debt payments. And I'd like to thank Dr. Kate because she painted a picture of what Ghana and Zambia look like. So they reached a point where they could not simply pay debts. They defaulted, and once they defaulted, this ended up cutting them off from the market, and it triggered a painful exercise, a painful phase of restructuring. What we noticed from these 2 case studies is that this crisis did not happen overnight. It happened quietly through supplementary budgets that bypassed parliamentary scrutiny and what would be the correct procedure. And then this also happens when nobody is watching because the citizen does not understand. So that from an average citizen's point of view, what the citizen now needs to demand is to be straightforward and ask the government that if you need to adjust the budget, then the public must be told. As in, tell us why you will need to spend the money before you actually spend it. And what you notice is that transparency cannot stop the main budget. It must follow every single supplementary request, because when we stop watching, that is when the real damage is done. Number 4 would be the policies, underpinning the borrowing itself and the debt ceiling. So you notice as Africans, the world judges us on a simple ratio, debt to GDP ratio. So that the total public debt divided, this is how they do it, is that they divide the total public debt against the size of the economy. And this is usually maybe the standard gauge of debt burden. So that you notice in sub-Saharan Africa, the debt and the population has doubled. So what you notice is, okay, what I'm trying to say is that you'll notice that in Africa and sub-Saharan African countries, our GDP is artificially low. It is low because of the massive informal sector. And this involved any aspect of the informal sector, the market women, like in Kenya, the border riders, and any other person doing any informal business. They're usually very hard to trace. So number-wise, they are invisible. If you compare this to the Western countries, each and every business aspect and business person is actually mapped. And based on this mapping, the GDP is usually, what do you call it? It's complete. So what you'll notice is that the Western institution, they used an incomplete scorecard to determine our credit rating. These formulas discriminate against us, and the consequence is they end up charging us a higher interest rate based on data that excludes the informal sector. So on this other aspect, an enlightened citizen must now then push for. Number one is better data collection to capture our real economy, and number two, a fairer credit setting that does not penalize us for our informal sector because it's work in progress. The last aspect of my presentation will be the rights of the citizen. In all of our constitutions, and you can peruse all of them, go through 1, 2, 3, 4, you just notice that what you notice is that we have rights to information, to participation, to accountability, but these rights actually mean nothing without awareness. And here is the critical insight of this. What you notice is that external debt is usually far more dangerous than domestic debt. How it works is that, so you notice here is the kicker. We have multilateral creditors like the World Bank and the IMF, and we also have bilateral creditors like, for example, China. And this is, we get to see this all of the time. So that you notice governments in Africa will prioritize paying external creditors as opposed to making provisions for what is important for the for its own countries, like things to do with health. So you notice sometimes the teacher's salary will actually delay, and when you really probe into why there is a delay, you notice government apportioned what would have been the salary for the teachers to paying something in form of an external debt. So that the ultimate test for a fiscal, the ultimate test is that we must move from being passive taxpayers to active fiscal citizens, which means we are able to track the debt, question the priorities, and demand accountability. As a closing remark, what I'll just say is that an informed citizen is the most powerful check on a government excess. When citizens understand the budgets, they're able to track the debts and demand accountability. And once they demand this accountability, government listens. A good example is the Gen Z protests recently done in Kenya. And that is just one of the examples. So as a finisher, the future of Africa's public debt is not just a matter for economies and finance. It is a matter for every citizen. So we need to have more information outside there. A lot of enlightenment, a lot of information, a lot of examples, a lot of inclusion and accountability. Because when the dust settles, if you're an informed citizen and a taxpayer, then you're just able to question the government. Just one thing before I finish is that most times you notice, I have to give credit where it's due, because you'll see there are people doing this, people and organizations who are going a step ahead to do this enlightenment. And 9 times out of 10, on the part of the public's enlightenment, but then you notice some of these African governments mistake this for activism and the consequences that come in between. So over to you, Lizzie.
Well, before you go, I don't know, the whole time you're talking, I wasn't so sure whether I need to get upset over the fact that, you know, they're spending what they don't have, or they're anticipating money will come from somewhere for this debts to be serviced. But a quick question. I feel like, you know, like the way Dr. Kate talked about ghost workers, and there's a solution to it. Pull out the public records, go on ground, kind of do a case to case, see whether they do exist, and, you know, sort out the ghost workers. I feel like, is it what if we end up getting debts in our local currencies? Would that be a solution? I feel like we take debts in other currencies and mostly in dollars. And when we
Yeah,
have to pay, we don't have but we do have our local currency, and we can get, for example, the Kenya Commercial Bank to print as many thousand notes of our own currency and service this debt. Would that be a solution? I was
um,
just wondering. I'm getting a little bit confused and upset at the same time, because why are they spending, anticipating that they might pay for this later on? Even they're using money that's reserved for emergencies like COVID. And now we had that scare with Ebola, and like the African CDC saying there's not enough money, but every country is supposed to have that safety net sort of a fund on the side, which we're having, but it's already being used, not for the intended purpose like school and education and infrastructure. We're borrowing that, but that money is going to the wrong part of it. So what would be a solution? What would be something viable?
Lizzie, as a precursor, first of all, it's actually true. What we need to understand is that government borrows locally and externally. The only benefit of borrowing locally is we're able to borrow in our own currency. So if it's Kenya shillings, Tanzania shillings, or any other form of African currency, then it's on a local currency. The consequence of borrowing externally is that you're going to get a debt in dollars, for example. Then your economy is not actually performing very well. So if we get an inflation of 20%, what does this mean in the interest that you borrowed using the external currency is that it increases by 20%. That's one side, so that we encourage government to, number one, borrow, but then negotiate these borrowings on a local currency, just so these fluctuations should not actually do not bring an interest issue when it comes to payment. But on the other side, Lizzie, just to throw in spanner into the works, you also notice that African governments are overborrowing locally to the extent that banks are prioritizing lending government that is own citizens, so that if you want to get a loan, you have a business idea, the average bank is looking at you from a point of view that, why should I give you money and struggle with getting that money from you when I can just give government, and government will print money or create ways of paying me? So that what you are saying is that if you have to borrow as a government, borrow using your local currency. But number two, also do not borrow to the extent that the money that is supposed to go into your citizens in form of capital and everything else that comes in between is not actually present. So it's a delicate balance, but then it's also something achievable through nice policies that can just be put into place to bring out a balance for the benefit of both the government and the citizens. Yeah.
It's going to take me a while before I understand all of this, and I might have to learn how to put my feelings aside and not get emotional. But thank you so much, Valentine, for that. Um, I need to recognize the partners who've made this particular discussion possible, of course. Thank you so much, Seize the Life Foundation, for organizing this monthly discussions. And thank you so much to the other partners. So we have Zenith Global Health, Africa, the East Africa Community Mental Health Network, Raise Your Voice, IREP, Covers Health. We have KHF in the room. And we thank you so much for the people who have tuned in and they're leaving their comments. Looks like Gaia might be running for office very soon. So thank you very much, Valentine. Thank you so much, the people who are commenting. With keeping track of your comments as we go. And I'm pretty sure also the contributors, the speakers will have a chance to look at this and just give their insights. So we have Abud Lucas 613. I agree on external debt being severe than local debt, but why do they prioritize external debt? That's a good question, and I'm hoping Valentine actually answered that during his comments. Hello, watching from Kenya. Thank you so much. Gaia Man, a big man thing. Yeah, looks like he's running for office at this rate. So thank you so much. And I appreciate what Valentine have just concluded with. We need to understand what, as a citizen, the rights, the legal standing that we have, like demanding to be told what we owe, why are we borrowing, do we really need that much, and what does it mean? How are we going to pay this debt, and how are we not going to get to a position where we cannot pay our own debts? And one of the ways and this is a standpoint from somebody who's consulted for civil societies. One of the things we do is we take our placards, we start lobbying, we start advocating, and we start demanding for answers. And that has worked quite well within the civil society. So I'm going to bring in the AIDS Healthcare Foundation team. We do have Na here. Na, I hope you're still there. You are, and clearly we have issues. We've seen some other countries at the beginning could not service the debt. Others are doing quite well, but looks like there are also solutions to the kind of debts that we're having. And I know one of the key solutions is what AHF is doing right now. And kudos to the team. I've seen the Freedom from Debt campaign that has been ongoing. I've been following closely on that. And that's a great initiative. That's just one of the initiatives I've seen that's kind of calling and putting the governments at the spotlight of public debt. So I will take it over to you. Let us know more about this campaign. Why this particular campaign? Why should I care about freedom from debt? And why is AHF really pushing this so far as we go? I've seen a lot of comments also coming in. We'll keep tabs on that. But now over to you. Public debt. Freedom. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Awesome. Thank you, Lizzie, and thank you to our previous speakers. As Lizzie had said, my name is Ngatendwe Mrombedzi. I am the Advocacy and Policy Manager for the Southern Africa region with an organization called the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and we are the largest independent provider of HIV care and treatment services. Now, in my finding myself here, I am a development practitioner by qualification and an anthropologist. So Lizzie, when you were asking, I don't know if I should feel emotional about this, if I should be upset, if, as an anthropologist, I'm thinking of the people at the other end of this conversation, the people that never get to confront the literature or the statistics. And I'm thinking about the person that's on the ground, the story that is living this reality of the public debt. And I think, like you, I must continuously remind myself to put the emotions aside. But like you said, it's civil society. A lot of our successes have been because we have been able to harness emotions and bring them into lobbying and bring them into our petitioning and bring them into our advocacy. And I think for the debt narrative, it's imperative because as our previous speakers are giving their submissions, we are hearing numbers, we're hearing figures, we're hearing currencies, but we need to hear that all of these numbers, for example, in our Freedom from Debt campaign, we're talking about 3.4 billion people who are living in countries that are spending more on servicing debt than they are on health and education. That's 3.4 billion people that look like me and you and our children, and somebody in a rural community, and somebody in a community where even the services are exceptionally hard to come by. Forget the health services, but the services that allow them to have a dignified existence, services like water. So those 3.4 billion people that we speak of as statistics, we hold a responsibility as civil society to bring them into this narrative. Now, on the 10th of June, we launched the Freedom from Debt campaign, rightfully, as you have said, Lizzie, and we are hoping to run this campaign in collaboration with other civil society organizations, partners, think tanks, development banks, but also our governments, because this is a whole of society issue. Every single person here and in our network is affected by debt. What was rightfully said was debt is not the enemy. Our countries do require these loans that they take so that they can continue to develop. But why we are now advocating for it is because the sovereign debt has become a barrier to human survival. It has left a lot of our global south countries. I don't like that term personally. I also don't like the term third world. So let me just use it very begrudgingly. It has left the global south in a position that has really hampered our development progress. It's really slowed down any prospects of our ability to be prosperous nations, but also it has put us in contentious positions that have threatened our peace. A lot of people, billions of people, are now left behind not knowing what the future looks like. For the African continent, it's particularly imperative when we bring in the conversation on the demographic dividend. When Dr. Kate was speaking, we spoke a lot about the youth. Lizzie, you spoke about the Kenyan youth who harnessed social media to advocate against what the government was doing. Africa has got the youngest population in existence, and we are projected to have an even younger population by 2063. And what that means is if we are not really investing in our development potential, these young people are faced with a future that is exceptionally uncertain. Employment already is under threat, but investment in even things that allow them to respond to health crises and climate crises are going to be hampered. Things like food security are threatened. A lot of our countries have populations that are living beneath the poverty line. In some countries, we call it the bread line. We are unable to feed our communities already. And that can be allocated to how much the government is investing in social services. Now, when we looked at this as the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, we looked at the fact that the sovereign debt crisis is actually a result, or we can call it a product, or we can call it a symptom of systemic oppression and global injustice. We can trace this back historically to the structural adjustment programs, the impact they had on the Millennium Development Goals before they became the Sustainable Development Goals, and whatever we are going to redress them as. So legacy colonialism is one of the pillars that informs the Freedom from Debt campaign. And it basically means that we are understanding that the global debt system, what our previous speaker so eloquently helped us to understand in terms of what it means for a nation. Now think of every single population in the global south having to navigate this, but understanding that it was never built on a level playing field. So we didn't start at the same place, and that's why we have these terminologies that we don't like. And the reality is this is rooted in the legacy of colonialism. We know we're previous colonies, former colonies, and we have the whole reality of neocolonialism. So I don't know if we can even say that it's a legacy. I think it's a continuity of colonialism, if you ask me personally. And so this particular playing field that we have was extractive. The global south was giving, the global north was benefiting and taking. Colonial economic structures were never fully dismantled when we moved on. Even though we gained independence, we became democratic nations, and that resulted in developing nations being inherently disadvantaged economies. And we were built to serve the colonial powers, and therefore the borrowing was never then designed in a way that would benefit us. And so due to this colonial legacy, us as former colonies, and I will continue to say us, I hope that's okay for the conversation, we were transformed into expert-based economies, so extractive economies rather, that is what we became, of fossil fuels, of metals, of minerals, of cash crops to feed the industrial growth in the global north. And that sounds horrible, but that is not a then issue. It's still a reality now. And then we further go on to understand that the governments of these developing nations, which is our governments, borrow to drive development. So we understand we need to be fueling development, but we don't have the resources. And yet we have got the riches that can be translated into leverage to allow us to feed and invest in our development. Multilateral institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF, or if we can call them the Bretton Woods institutions, the private banks and the bondholders still hold enormous power over the terms and conditions on which us as developing nations are getting our money or the loans. So the first thing that is really fueling and helping us to drive this narrative, and why we're saying everybody must come on board, is we understand that the private creditor still hold a dominating power. We still understand that there is a historical imbalance. But then there are also the austerity measures, the multilateral institutions. Now, I'm using this language. I'm hoping that you will go back into the glossary and you will understand these terminologies, because one of the biggest barriers is we we often use language in the development space. We often use language in the INGO space that excludes our communities. So the intention is not that, but I would like to articulate the framework of the campaign first in a way that is more aligned with that language. And then if I can just quickly run it in the interest of time, I see, Lizzie, you're about to start using the prompting words to
No
say
worries.
hurry up.
You just no worries. It's not that. I'm trying to restrain my emotions for sure, because now I have so many questions. But please carry on, Ga.
Okay, absolutely. Thanks, Lizzie. So there's also the understanding that there has been an unequal financial market that we are navigating under. The conversation of interest rates has come up. I won't hamper down on it, but to give an example, developing nations pay 2 to 4 times higher interest rates than the United States, and up to 12 times higher interest rates than a first world country that is Germany, for example. So if we go into the numbers, we can see a lot more of this. So it's an unequal financial market. We don't get favorable exchange rates. You ask the question, if we borrow in our own currency, would that make a difference? But already the previous speaker answered that it will not change anything in the greater scheme of things, but we must understand that these unequal or unfavorable rates that we are getting are driven by the global market dynamics, of which we are not influencing. We don't have any control over that. And this results in debt burdens, which are growing even to a place where, regardless of what the government is doing to service it, we are never getting ahead of the curve. So it's almost by design that we continuously find ourselves having to navigate a curveball after another. And then there's also the reverse flow of wealth. Now, this one I found when I was getting on board with this campaign, I found this to be exceptionally frustrating. I won't use infuriating. For every dollar of aid that enters a developing nation, multiple dollars leave through the debt servicing, tax loops from natural resource extraction, and the illicit financial flows, which basically means that, yes, we are receiving aid, but that aid as it comes in, everything that is being extracted from us is going out in multiple dollars. And so it is not balancing the scales. And I found that to be exceptionally infuriating. For numbers, poorer countries are financing richer ones by $3 trillion annually. This means that per year, $3 trillion is leaving the developing nations back into the developed nations. Make that make sense. And this is also compounded by the fact that the top 1% of the world owns more wealth than 95% of humanity. And again, bringing in the human face of it. 1% person in a pool of everybody is owning more money than the entire 95%. We don't know where the other 4% are, but that's a conversation for another day. And then, so we used that, and we said what we are seeing is, whatever literature you are reading or however you want to look at it, the global south has no money to be servicing the social services that will benefit their communities, firstly. Secondly, we then realized that it's not only for the people that are within the conversation. We have to think of the future generations, and then we have to paint the picture so that we can lobby and bring the human faces in as a civil society organization. We need to say that for that $1, that many countries have got poverty lines that say that there are people that are not even able to reach $1 so they can sustain themselves. But for that $1, you're taking back X amount back. We need that to be able to at least give a dignified existence, not an extravagant, a lavish existence, but a dignified existence, and to ensure that our populations can respond when we are faced with public health crises, climate shocks that are affecting our ability to even generate food. So we came up with 3 very simple things because we need action. We are not just singing and saying, do something. We're saying that our governments must now be at a point where we can say, as the Global South, we need the operationalization because the conversations of implementation are ongoing. We need implementation, operationalization of a borrowers forum. And this came out from the FFD4, which is the Financing for Development, the fourth sitting of it, and the G20 summit in South Africa. To date, I cannot say I know where that process is, and that is problematic because this is something that has been said to say that this is going to help our countries, but where is it? Who is leading it? Why is it invisible to civil society? And how can we get on board to support those efforts to implement it? So we're saying we need urgent political commitment that's under the Borrowers Forum, and we need to ensure that once this is there is an understanding that this is going to give the Global South collective bargaining power. We need this in order to secure fairer conditions and terms when we come back to negotiations. It allows us pushback. It allows us to be able to leverage back an element of power. And then also it's going to help us just with peer learning. We heard 2 case studies about what's happening in terms of responding to this debt narrative. How can we ensure that there is an ongoing learning cycle around this? Countries can share experiences, they can share strategies, they can also leverage their different technical expertise. Secondly, we need mandatory debt pauses. When COVID hit, we didn't know where to go and how to go about it. And we lost lives unnecessarily. You know, we use COVID as a measuring point of how history is going to remember us because we learned. But we need debt pauses, mandatory debt pauses, to be something that is considered because climate shocks are coming. Public health emergencies are rolling out. It's one after another. It's no longer when can we imagine if it will happen, it's when is it going to hit us. So mandatory debt pauses during these emergencies, because we have learnings from COVID-19, we should be able to take every resource that we have during that time to respond to the public health needs of our different countries. Climate disasters, they don't pause. These things don't pause just because you don't have money or because you owe the IMF. It continues and lives are lost unnecessarily. Again, the human angle. Why should somebody die when there is resources and a policy that can be shifted and somebody who can say, okay, let's just wait and then we'll pick up on this very unfair practice that we have anyway at a later stage. Let's deal with this thing. And then finally, the third thing, we are advocating for an AI solidarity levy. It's not a new kid on the block, but I think we can really put our heads together. We can bring the economists together. We can bring the financiers and their literature. We can bring everybody on board because AI is an emerging industry. It's $1 billion industry. How are we going to leverage and enhance our public response, public monies response, if I can call it that, by leveraging an AI solidarity levy? So it's said here by estimate that the AI market is expected to rise from, and I have to say this correctly, $189 billion, which is what it was in 2023, to about $4.8 trillion by 2033. That is a lot of money. And a lot of AI's development, yes, a lot of AI's development is heavily concentrated in the richer economies like the US and China. Why don't we tax that? Why don't we levy that so that we can have more money coming in, flowing into the global south? So those are just some 3 actions that I think when we go back into our circles, we can take this and start to think about this from a more simpler angle. When you don't have money as an individual, take yourself as a parent, you cannot provide the essential needs that your child has. Your child can't go to school, your child can't go to a hospital, your child can't be the best version of themselves. And extend that to say, if South Africa can't do this, if Zimbabwe can't do this, if Kenya can't do this, it means that every single person in these countries cannot reach their full potential. But it's not looking like it's going to change, which means that as it advances, that potential, if we're using that as a benchmark, is regressing further and further and further away. And eventually we'll be faced with a time when we cannot be the nations that we want to be, and debt will be a reason for that. Thanks, Liz.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I think I was physically prepared for this discussion, but not mentally. I'm going to bring back Valentine and Dr. Kate if you're there. I'm not so sure if they're still on the call.
Yeah, I'm on the call.
You're on the call. I don't know whether Dr. Kate is still there. Well, I think I have a solution. This is, and this is coming out from what Nga was saying. I have a solution for all the debt problems that we have. I think so. And that is, who do we need to talk to give us a white, clean slate? Because clearly, the way Nga was speaking, we were dealt a bad hand. I don't know who went to the negotiations to start negotiating for us to get. We were dealt a bad hand. We know that now. We need a clean slate and we start from fresh. Isn't that possible, Valentine? Can't we just ask for, oh, declare bankruptcy? Doesn't that work? You declare bankruptcy, all good.
I think it's actually possible. What you just need to do is what I understand is that it's a sectoral engagement, but we need to have political goodwill, because the political goodwill in all of this is what's actually going to be the solution to this Africa debt issue. We need to have leaders come in who are hell-bent towards improving the economic status of their countries, as opposed to the other aspect of unjust enrichment. So once we have political goodwill, then the laws are going to make sense. The court is doing its part, and the citizen will now pay the taxes, understanding that indeed what I'm paying for is going to work for me. But political goodwill is number one for me.
And now, who do we need to lobby? Who do we need to advocate? Which offices are we supposed to be standing outside right now telling them clean slate? Clean slate, let's start with zero debt.
You know, I want to ask a question, Lizzie, before I ask that to Valentine, because, and I always want to ask this question, even to the politicians themselves. What does political goodwill mean and look like? Because everything we say is we need political will. We need political goodwill. When you're elected into office, you are there to represent the interest of your citizens. Then suddenly, you no longer remember the interests, or the policy doesn't favor it, or the language can't be changed. So I'm very curious to know, what does political goodwill look like? So I'm going to pause that. You may come back to that. Now, Lizzie, who do we need to speak to? If it was me, we need to be speaking to everyone in the room. You asked the question that now another question has escaped me, but I'll come back to it. When you are negotiating, yes, who went to the negotiation table? Those people go to the IMF. It's your Minister of Finance and his advisors. It's the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I don't know, because if they don't like your country, maybe they don't give you good interest rates. But those are all individuals. And what I have learned in this space, when you network in advocacy, you realize that if I write to the office of the president, I'm unlikely to get a something. But if I meet the president in a gathering and I see him as a person and he sees me as a person, we are likely to set up a meeting. I think we need to stop hiding behind policies and titles and just look at each other and say, look, we can't do this as a nation. I know it sounds like very frivolous, like, okay, this is wishful thinking, but we overcomplicate this. We need the IMF to read the policies with a human story. There's a rise in storytelling as a policy tool for a reason, because often we have been making these policies as though they are governing non-entities. Then we are like, but people have died. And then you're like, but you knew they were for people. So I think we really need to go back to treating each other as people and not prioritizing numbers, not prioritizing profits. We always say when we're advocating against farmer greed, people lives before profits, people before profits. So I think the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the President himself, all line ministers, because everyone is serving people, sit at the table. But transparency, that term came out. Be transparent about where you are. Confront each other, which also means that you might find that even corruption comes into the conversation. Deal with that first, because we can't be pouring money into a leaking bucket. At the end of the day, you can't continue to be given money when you can't show what it has done before. So people before anything else.
Yeah, those policies are for people. And let's talking about people, this is where it gets more interesting. The more debt we have, and now you've put it quite clearly, you cannot take your kids to school, they cannot access healthcare, they cannot be the best version of themselves. And this is what we're talking about. So, Kanye, we're talking about the youth not being the best version of themselves. The more we borrow, the more they're going to be paying. It's up to them to continue paying this debt in the near future. And that's the reason why we're having this discussion, so that the youth can understand how they're getting looped in into this particular discussion of the more your government is borrowing, the more they have to pay that particular debt in the future. And in the future affects the youth right now. They're the ones who will be working to service this particular debt. Kanye, you've noticed the whole time I was like, I don't know whether I need to get upset. I don't know what feelings to have. I was mentally prepared, physically prepared. I'm not so sure whether I was prepared for this discussion because now my emotions are all over the place. So the youth, their mental health and preparation for what this actually means for them. Over to you. Maybe you can start by introducing yourself, and then we can kick off.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kani Chabalala, the founder of Seize the Light Foundation. I won't get into my background. I think that lots has been said, and in the interest of time, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can go look at all that technical stuff if you're into that kind of thing. I just want to acknowledge the panelists that spoke before me. Valentine, I love your view about the enlightened citizen. I love your take on it. I think it's important. I think we do need to be conscientized about debt. To me, it's interesting that it's sort of, you're too young in some contexts, but in some contexts, you're not young enough. So to me, that's interesting. It's either the kids need to start talking around the adults' table, or you leave us out of it. But where it impacts us, they need to come to the table. So I love the fact that you are encapsulating your movement as an enlightened citizen movement. It's relevant to everybody. Dr. Kate, absolutely love your positioning about democratizing finance. I mean, she knows. She was at the World Bank. It's all jargon. At the end of the day, money is money. Like, it doesn't matter what words you're trying to use. You can say it's capital. You can say it's leverage. At the end of the day, we're talking about money. The boys love to confuse it, and they've done this on purpose. I mean, I spent my better part of my youth with the finance bros. I know all about it. They talk the talk. You never know what they're talking about. You have to simplify it for yourself. We're going to publish the glossary of terms. Everybody get on board so we can actually hear what they're saying. Because at the end of the day, we're just talking about money. That's all it is. Nga, development finance, I mean, she said a mouthful, she said a mouthful about development finance. And I feel like her and I could have a separate session on just development finance, because she's actually even gone into the historics, and on the continent we know our history around colonialism and development. It's quite layered. It's quite nuanced, and maybe a lot of the things that the public doesn't understand. You've got to go look at when was the UN formed, when was the IMF formed, when was the World Bank formed. There's timing to all of this, right? The impoverishment of Africa didn't happen overnight. It happened strategically. It happened at Berlin. And how is it possible that people that are in remote places are able to have such a stronghold over the continent? It's because of the system that's set up structurally. So thank you, Nga, for mentioning that. Lizzie, the moderator, I know you're not okay. I was not prepared. You were not prepared, but thank you for highlighting the activism, because I think it was you who mentioned, or Valentine, I'm not sure, how is this conversation is going to be viewed as an activism conversation in some jurisdictions. And I find that interesting. I mean, I'm going to get into my portion of sharing, like why conversation is being had on this platform to contextualize it. But I love the fact that you are always highlighting how Gen Z is always willing to speak up, whether they like it or not. Because at the end of the day, they've realized this is their lived reality. This is what they're going to be inheriting. So they are going to be the loudest in the room. And I support them. They rightfully should be. They're happy to say the things that we just didn't feel brave enough to say. So all the Gen Zers who are listening, keep on speaking. It is your future. It is your future. No one is going to come and say to you that actually we've blown all the money, enjoy. You've got to say, no, you don't blow the money. And if you're going to blow the money, you first explain to me, how did you blow it, on what? They need to be involved. So Sorry, and I have to speak in that language because that's how the Gen Zs who understand exactly what I mean. Okay, so now to depart, let me just contextualize why this conversation has to be had on such a platform like this. So we're an organization that's invested in people's mental health and well-being. And I'm going to backtrack and maybe just give more context as to the founder journey, because this is what's even led me into these spaces and understanding public debt in the way that I do. So I've obviously come from a private debt background and spent so much time just moving money for big companies, and hadn't really been focusing on development finance. And having done finance in the West, or in the more established markets, as they like to say, those sophisticated markets, you see sort of advanced lending structures that you wouldn't really see on the continent. And that's just because the perception of the West is that they've got the finances to pay. You get things like unsecured lending. You will never have unsecured lending in Africa. They will always want to take some sort of security, but I don't want to get into too technical terms. So when we embarked on our journey and said, okay, we want to solve mental health, how exactly do we go about doing this? First thing you would do is obviously try and go directly to your customer. So when we went directly to our customers were saying to us, we don't have the money to spend on, we were focusing on mindfulness classes, so your breath work, meditation, and yoga. We just don't have the money. Now, anybody who's in mindfulness and mental health know these are essential coping mechanism tools that people need to have access to, but the price attached to them, not everybody can afford it. So naturally, as an organization, we think to ourselves, how do we now push this cost onto somebody else who should be caring about the people that can't afford to pay for it? Okay, let's go to corporate. So we go to corporate. Everybody who knows, corporates are supposed to have corporate social responsibility, because the idea around private capital is, no one is saying that you shouldn't make a profit. No one is saying that. However, greed is where we need to draw the line. The conversation is, should you make a profit, you need to make sure that a certain percentage of that profit is then donated to organizations that are doing good for just general civil society. To my mind, it makes sense, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're generating a profit, you've used human capital to reach those goals. No company ever is reaching its profitable goals solely based on nothing. You've either used resources from a particular place, or you've engaged people's labor. So it only makes sense that you have to give back. And this is where the concept of giving back came from. So I'm starting there because, somebody mentioned illicit financial flows. And I'm like, don't even get me started. Because what I'm like, don't even get me started, because actually, that's where it started. That percentage that they were supposed to be donating for good, what's been happening is that those percentages are being donated to intermediary companies that are still part of the holding companies of that particular group. So on balance sheet, it looks like, yes, money is moved from here to here. But if you look at the group, it's actually still flowing within one organization. And then what do? We decide what the projects are going to be. And that makes no sense. If I am already deciding that this is what I'm going to fund, it means I haven't consulted the community. I don't know what the local needs of the people are. I'm just moving money off my balance sheet so I can look good and I can have tax relief. I've done my part. So all the announcements that you see where companies are saying that they've donated this or they've done that, it doesn't serve civil society. They're just serving their own interests, okay? Now, coming back to the continent, unfortunately, has been in the position that it has been in. But I think the president of Rwanda basically said, as a president, he's in the same position negotiating with private sector and public sector institutions. And I found that extremely interesting. Because at the end of the day, private sector, you're liable to your shareholders. Public sector, you're supposed to be liable to the citizens. Now, where has accountability been passed through? Accountability has been passed through because your very governments on this side, on the public side, are getting money from public institutions that are external to the continent, which already means they're driving the agenda. And then on the private capital side, private capital is liable to shareholders. So they disperse the money. They're not going to really be interested in, does the country need this? They make money once the money leaves their balance sheet. That's how they make money, through their interest and everything we've been talking about here. So we can't be surprised that the citizens don't really know who's supposed to be liable for them, because your government is not necessarily accountable to you. They've got bigger stakeholders that they're worried about, right? So now when we come in and say we need money to finance our mental health programs, where do we go as an organization? Because if public sector's mandate is already being decided by somebody else, and private sector's mandate is also being decided by somebody else, we're at grassroots with the community who's telling us that we need this, but we just can't afford it. We're left there like, well, I don't know who we're supposed to go to, right? So I give all of this context, so I hope that people will understand this is where we're finding ourselves. Civil society is broken, private sector is also broken. And the point of having civil society movements was a balance so that private sector didn't yield the amount of power that it currently does. You can't have a situation or a context where private capital is allowed to come into any country and dominate. There's balance, even within governmental structures. That's why you've got your judiciary, your legislature to balance. You can never have one arm having all of this power. So everybody is very surprised as to how we are where we are on the debt discussion. But actually, we can't be surprised, because it does mean that there's one powerful party that actually has power over all of it, right? Whether it's public or private. At some point, there's been this mixing in the funds, mixing in stakeholders, donors. Something has gone awry, and we were struggling to get down to the bare bones of it, of who's setting the agenda. You can't tell me that you've elected people that are supposed to be funding according to a policy. Who set the policy, right? The person who set the policy is the person who's put money in the purse. So it's never going to be about the citizens. So unfortunately, this has undermined public well-being. People really aren't well. I'm now just going to touch a little bit on Gen Z, just to explain, all the younger generation, just to explain like how their fragmented journey is impacting their mental health. We must remember that most of these countries, they've amassed their wealth through payee tax, so tax generated through employees, right? And that's another reason, I hate the fact that the statistics are focusing on Africa being the next biggest working group. Ultimately, it's just how many people are we going to be able to tax through PAYE? That's really the concern. The concern is not about your well-being and like, what are you going to do every day if you don't work? And I think that for me, that takes the focus away from simpler questions of life. Are we here to fulfill these agendas that either, like everything that everyone shared, at the end of the day, we don't know what's true, what's false. All we know is that our lived reality is what it is, right? We don't know why we're living how we're living. We don't know why there's so much inequality in the world. We're trying to get to grips with how are people saying that there's programs, there's money. People are saying there's trillions on the continent. We're all like, okay, where are they? Why aren't they trickling down? So I focus on the lived experience, right? Then who are we supposed to trust as citizens? Because you're telling us that we have a voice, but we don't exactly know where we're supposed to channel this voice, right? So the younger generation, you say people are only concerned so much with the statistics in Africa because historically countries amassed their wealth, the public purse, through people working. But now if you look at the pipeline from graduates to workforce, that's now broken. So the question is, who's going to be working and pumping money into the state? No one is sure. I mean, America, I think it's interesting. I don't like to talk much about it because I don't really like the person who's at the helm at the moment. But I mean, I think they're one country that through the Industrial Revolution and how the economy has evolved and now stagnated, I think the fact that they're now talking about universal credit is that they're not going to have a workforce that's actually going to be able to generate enough money to sit in the public purse. So I think we all need to maybe step back and understand why the emphasis on working demographic, why the emphasis on working, why the emphasis on tax. Is this a good use of our time, or are we being co-opted and pulled into narratives and agendas that have nothing to do with us? Because I've explained to you who the stakeholders are. It's not the public. So I think generally, and what we advise in our mental health sessions, get to know yourself, explore your passions, explore why are you on this earth, because it cannot be for all of this. This is all crumbling. I mean, late stage capitalism, we're seeing it all. AI, automation, we're being pulled in one direction and another direction. People are being quoted saying fresh water shouldn't be used for citizens, it should be used for machines. All sorts of diabolical things are being said. I think we would love to create two parallel universes. One for those who are capitalists and extractionists. Can they live on that side?
Let's divide.
And then let's just divide. And then can us who are like really interested in the real meaning of life and don't really want to get bogged down by all of this, live our best life on the other side. So Liz, I'm going to leave it there and let you come. And I'm going to bring everybody else in because I think we're moving on to the next thing.
Because I don't want to spoil the weekend for anyone, to be honest. We have a big game. It's still the World Cup. I know, Valentine, you're going to watch the game. We have a big game coming up. And I think a lot of attention is over there. But in less than 1 minute, while they're celebrating who's going to win tomorrow, what would be that thing that you feel like as a young person? And now that we're talking about debt, and I've seen a lot of comments coming in, and people have a great suggestions on how we can tackle this problem. So in less than a minute, as they watch the World Cup, we don't know who's going to take that. What is that thing they need to think about the minute that they're going to announce who has won? And that's a lot of high now that's going to cool down by the end of the day tomorrow. What is that thing every youth, especially within, I know, Nga says global south, developing countries, those are no terms she's happy about. What would be that thing you'd want them to pay attention to as we conclude? I'll start off with Valentine. You're the only guy in the, we really do appreciate you. You're the only guy in the call. So we'll start with you, go to Nga, and then Kanye.
So maybe the encouragement I just like to throw outside there is a lot of this information is actually available online. So take time to look at online resources, have a curious mind, have strategies, and then speak from a point of position and authority. Just so even when you're questioning one or two things, question it from a point of authority. I've looked at this, it said this, it does not reflect this. Then that is where the conversation is going to come, because it's one thing to get enlightened, but then goodwill has to work both ways. Have some level of curiosity, access information online, questions, start conversation, and just be that person outside there who is curious about what's happening. And just as a kicker, as a finisher, I know we've talked about securitization, interest payments, supplementary budgets, political goodwill, and Nga, I haven't forgotten your question, but here is a question. It is just one thing to take away. If our children are going to inherit this debt, should they not inherit the power to decide how the debt accrues in the first place? So right now, we are borrowing from their future without giving them a seat at the table. We are spending their tomorrows without consent. The economists will say these are numbers, but at the end of the day, what you understand is that numbers don't lie. So as a finisher, education is not just about literacy. It is about fiscal literacy. Find out specifically about what you want to question, then now question it from a point of authority. That is just my encouragement.
And maybe just to switch and go to the Gen Z slang and language. Yo, we've already spent your future. If that doesn't scare you tomorrow when you're watching that game, I don't know what will, but we've already spent your future. So we don't know what's going to happen to you guys. Now, over to you.
Wow, Lizzie, there's so many things that I really wish I could land with, but I think we are like that toxic uncle in the family, the one who swindled the entire money of the family. And then upon their death, you see they have nothing except debt to hand over to you, because that's the reality. I read a meme somewhere that said, if you have no plans for my generational wealth, you cannot align me with the generational curse. These young people have a responsibility, and we have a responsibility to make them curious about the state of affairs around finances for their different nations. You cannot be curious about something you don't know about. If I was not in this space, I don't think I would be so interested in knowing what my national debt is. And it's unfortunately the reality of anything. You don't know how to question what you don't know. If we can take our mantle and make sure these questions are in a lot of spaces, in as simplified a version as they can be, without the jargon, without boiling the ocean, circling back, iterating, grabbing the low-hanging apple, all of those jargons that we use. Every person can then be curious to know, but we also then need to say, where can you go and ask these questions? Who should you be asking the questions with? Like that toxic uncle, you know he's doing something, but you fear asking him. We need to be advocates in our own right. And one thing about advocates is we're fearless. You have to be bold and brave. So our young people, we need to now go back and say, on these platforms where they go, TikTok, Instagram, how do we give them the language to be the faces that ask the questions? How do they go into their community and make this an everyday group? But for our political leaders, help us to understand what will tickle the will in you so that you can do something. What do we need to do to make you interested in this? Because rightfully so, we have robbed the future generation, and they will remember us in history as being the people that essentially bankrupted the future.
That is true. That is so true. I don't know why I let you. Now I'm getting emotional again. I don't know why. Every time you speak, I was okay. Now I'm getting emotional all over again. Kanye, please, over to you. Now that
I
you're the
mean,
bad uncle, the drunk uncle in the camp, in the family. So
I mean, yeah, I think that look, this conversation it's timely and it needs to be had, and there's a lot of intersectionalities in people's lived experience. So I think for anybody who's maybe trying to understand it, all you need to think of is how is this impacting your everyday life? And that's why I say, like, for Gen Z, it is the pipeline for from graduate to employment has collapsed. What does that mean? Nothing is free, because I think a lot of people, when they say, oh, education is free, it's really not. That came from state money, right? And then you need to ask, where did the state money come from? So in your own smaller context, analyze the, I hate to say this financial jargon, but the flow of funds. It just means, where is the money coming from? Where did it go? And then start to unpack for yourself, like, who are the stakeholders in all of this? Because I do also acknowledge that we're having this conversation as experts, and we're using jargon that other people may not understand. To us, it's normal. But all I will say is just really break it down to your own personal circumstances. Analyze your day. What is it that you're accessing? Is it the internet? What are your rates on the internet? Why are your rates like that? What are your rates that you're paying for data in comparison to somebody else living somewhere else? Why is that the case? So I think for me, people are only interested in this when it affects about something that affects them. So if you're passionate about the internet, TikTok, analyze this conversation through your data, and then it will help you understand. I don't know, if you're passionate about well-being, maybe you can't afford your favorite class. Analyze, like, why is wellness commercialized? Is this something I should be paying for? Why is the healthcare system reactive? Why are we only funding medication? Shouldn't we be funding preventative care? So anything that matters to you, because at the end of the day, all our wants and desires are different, right? What matters to you, Lizzie, maybe you're saying, I want free education. Maybe Nga wants free Wi-Fi. Maybe Valentine wants to play football for free. I don't know. But we need to meet people where they are. So anything that you love and enjoy in your life, please analyze it from an economic perspective. You don't need to be an expert. At the end of the day, this public debt crisis is undermining people's well-being. So it's all of our business. You don't need to be qualified. It's impacting your lived experience, and that's what makes you an expert.
Well, I don't have anything to say after that. This was an amazing, fast conversation. This conversation has been there. It's ongoing. Join Nga and the HF team on the Freedom from Debt campaign going on. If you want legal advice, you know where to get Valentine. And if you want to deal with issues, mental health, and how this affects everything else, especially for the future, please reach out to Seize the Light Foundation Africa. My name is Miss Lizzie Otai, and I'm a communications development consultant based in Nairobi, Kenya. I would say thank you. And as you watch the game tomorrow, please ask the person sitting next to you, do you know they've already spent the money we're supposed to be spending for our future? If you're a young person. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a great one. Thank you.